Hello, whoever's listening, thank you for being here. It is such a pleasure to share my experiences and insights on parenting and childcare. And today I wanted to talk about how we can make amends with our children. This is very close to me, this topic, because I, as a mother, have struggled all my life as a mother to feel good enough. And quite often I feel like I've failed my children. I've said or done the wrong things. And I've noticed over the years a difference between apologizing to my children out of guilt, because that doesn't actually work. So no matter how much I might say sorry for the way that I've behaved or treated them, it's not going to change and make me feel better. What does make me feel better is truly being sorry and forgiving myself as well. If I have the courage to admit to my mistakes and apologize for them, then that's amazing. That's worth forgiveness for myself. And I've had to learn this. I've had to learn that it's okay to make mistakes as long as I'm learning from them and I'm not repeating them over and over again, that I'm being honest about them with my children and apologizing. So when my children were young, it was a bit different to today now that they're all older, and I have adult children now. And when my children were younger, I often remembered my own relationship with my parents, and I thought, I don't ever want that to happen. I don't ever want there to be a falling out and we don't speak to each other, because that's what would happen for me and my parents. And I didn't have the way that things were amended then was we just didn't talk about what happened and we said sorry and moved on. And this might be seen as the right thing to do, but it just kept happening and happening, and there was no honesty involved or authentic conversation. It was kind of buried and we didn't talk about it. And I thought, I don't want that to happen. I don't ever want there to be such a big fight or such awful things said to each other that my children stop speaking to me. And thankfully that hasn't happened, but I have felt like it could get to that point if I'm not aware of what I'm saying and where it's coming from. So when I started, I wasn't always this way. So I was raised to hide things and bury things and not be authentic. I was not shown how to have an authentic conversation, how to apologize, how to make amends. I was not shown those things growing up. Often the people around me were not sorry for the things that they said or did. And even if they were, they didn't know how to say it to me. So I didn't know that they were sorry. I didn't feel that they were sorry. I thought that everything was my fault. So I was like this with my children for some time, not to the extreme of my own upbringing, but I did often see things as my children's fault. However, once I began my awakening journey and becoming aware of my own thoughts and feelings and actions, I started to take responsibility for my words and my actions and my feelings. And that's a huge change for somebody to look at your child and go from thinking they are responsible for my happiness to I'm responsible for my happiness. So once I got to that point, realizing that it was up to me to change the way that I was perceiving my children and the world and myself, I started to set them free from that responsibility. So this doesn't mean that when they did things I couldn't say, that really hurt me, that really upset me, could you please not do that? But often the hurt and the disappointment that I was feeling towards them was my own, and it was coming from somewhere deeper within me that really had nothing to do with what my children were doing. Once I began to become aware of the underlying agenda and thoughts and expectations and wounds that were driving me to act out towards my children, I began to be able to say sorry and admit to things. And this was a wonderful healing thing. I started to feel so much better and so different as a mother. Rather than just say sorry and walk away, I would say to my children things like, I'm sorry, Mummy's just going through some hard feelings right now, and I took them out on you, and I'm sorry. I'm going to go and work on my feelings. I'm going to take some time to look within myself. It's not your fault. These things can be so powerful for a child to hear. And often, even as adults, that's the one thing that we want to hear from our own parents is, it's not your fault. It was never your fault. It was my own feelings and my own wounds that caused me to hurt you, and I'm sorry. That's what we want to hear. So that's what I started telling my children. And what stood out to me the most was not how it made my children feel, it was how it made me feel. It was like a weight had been lifted. And often, like years later, I would watch, and I still occasionally watch, near-death experience stories because it just brings me such joy. And that you'd often hear of a life review when you cross over and having to feel the pain that you caused other people and wishing that you could go back and say sorry. And sometimes I thought, I don't want to wait till then to be sorry. I don't want to wait to die to be sorry for my mistakes. So I made an effort to own up and apologize, because I wanted to feel that relief now. I wanted to feel how good it felt to forgive myself and others. So as my children grew older, they became quite used to when they would see me upset and I would make a mistake and take it out on them. They got to know that I was always going to be sorry and that I was always going to take responsibility. And our relationships just completely transformed, and we became very close and intimate, and it became easy for me to be honest with my children when they would see me crying. I wouldn't make them feel sorry for me, but I would say something simple like, I've had a hard day, somebody upset me at work and I don't want to talk right now, I just want to be left alone. And they would understand it's not about them. It was when I was taking it out on them that they naturally thought it was about them. So they don't feel that anymore. They know, okay, this is about mum, this is what mum's going through. And now having adult children, I do remember speaking to parents on occasion with adult children, and they've often said to me they don't approve of what their son or daughter's doing, and they don't listen to them, and they don't know why, but their children just stop talking to them and they don't have them in their life anymore. And this is very sad to me because I couldn't imagine not having any of my children in my life. And what stood out to me was that none of these parents were taking any responsibility. They would say to me, it's them, they've screwed up their life and they're going to learn one day and they're going to learn one day. And I thought I couldn't do that. Like I would, no matter what my children did or do, despite being upset and angry and having normal feelings as a parent, I couldn't let it get to that point to where I wasn't speaking to my children. So I've had things happen with my eldest, who's now 22, and he can be quite stubborn and he can do things that I don't approve of, I don't think are necessarily right. And I often will comment and say things, and I know deep down that even though it's okay to give him a little reminder here and there, I know that these children of mine need to learn through their own consequences. And if they are adults, then there really isn't anything I can say or do about their life. They need to live it their own way. But there have been times that I have stepped over the line and I have given my opinion and judgment when it has not been wanted. And that has left me feeling very bad and like this is not who I want to be. And what I want to point out is it's not about the mistakes we make or the things we say. It's about making amends. It's about the willingness to say, hey, I'm sorry, or you were right. I would often say this to my children because a lot of things that I would think that they were doing wrong, they were actually right. Or some of the things they would say to me like, butt out of it, mum, or go away, I don't like you. A lot of times when I would go away and think about it, they were right. Some of the things that they said were right. Maybe I did need to bugger off and go away and mind my own business. Maybe that was what was needed. Or maybe I did need to butt out and leave them alone. They were right. When you can admit that your children are right and you are wrong, without going into self-guilt and beating yourself up, it's a very powerful thing. It makes us feel empowered and it brings us closer to our children. Our children start to trust us and know that we're going to take responsibility. They admire us for being honest. So often I will say things to my eldest, and what's important is that I always find a way, even if I can't get to the point where I agree, I always get to the point where it comes back to love. If I can get back to love, if I can get back to, well, I may not like what my children are doing, I may not agree with it, but they're still my children, and they need to learn these things on their own, especially if they're adults. When I can get to that place and I can push past my pride and my ego, and I can say, I'm sorry, I love you anyway, and point out the things they are doing right, then that's great. Like that's better than making a mistake and saying something and regretting it, having not ever made amends or saying sorry. And if I don't do that, one day my son may get tired of my opinions, and he may say, I've had enough of this, stay out of my life, and I may lose him. And that's a very real possibility, because I've seen that happen, and I've had it happen in my own relationships growing up. So I feel like in order to get to that point where we can say sorry and make amends, there needs to be a lot of inner work on our behalf. There needs to be a lot of willingness to go within and face our own feelings, because if we don't ever get to that point, we're just bouncing it back off onto other people, onto our children. It's never coming back into ourselves to be met, to be fully seen and understood. And that's the first step to being able to say sorry, to being able to make amends, is taking self-responsibility. And what that looks like is being with our own feelings and wounds. A lot of times what we're taking out on our children or seeing in our children is our own unhealthy relationships with our own parents. And if we can give love to ourselves and we can realize that we were never wrong, it wasn't our fault, that we weren't responsible for how our parents felt, then this is going to help us to be able to do the same with our children and realize that they aren't to blame either, and that they are allowed to make mistakes. Because in fact, how do we know how good it feels to say sorry? And how do we ever learn forgiveness if we don't mess up, if we don't make mistakes? And do we want to deprive our own children of that growth? How are they ever going to learn compassion and kindness and understanding if they don't know what it feels like to mistreat others? That's how we learn how to be kind, is by being unkind. And the most important thing is if we learn from it and we know that, hey, we did have that experience, but we don't want it again. We don't want to do that because it doesn't feel good. What feels good is love and forgiveness and kindness. And whenever we show that to our children, that is giving us more love and more light. And that's going to bring us even closer to our children. So I hope you've liked this podcast. I'm so happy to have you here listening to my videos and my channel, and I'd love to hear from you if you have anything to share or add. Bye.